Good morning, boys and girls. How are you today? I hope you had a good week. Did you enjoy last week's story about Jairus' daughter and the old woman who Jesus healed? Did you tell your mom and dad about that? That Jesus always has time for us, no matter how busy he may be or we think that he is, that if we ask him to do something, that he will always stop and answer our prayers when we call on him. So remember that even when things seem hopeless, like the little girl in the story last week, everyone thought she was dead and that there was no hope, and Jesus brought her back to life. Jesus can do amazing things in your life if you just let him. Today I've got a friend of mine, Miss Colleen, and she's going to tell you a story about a little boy who had a lot of faith in God too. So you need to be quiet, sit down, get settled in, and listen to what Miss Colleen has to say today.
Good morning, boys and girls. I'm going to read you the story about David and Goliath. Have some of you heard about David and Goliath? Yeah? Well, I hope you guys enjoy this story. David was a good shepherd and a good harp player. But when God sent the prophet Samuel to name David as the next king of Israel, David was surprised. He was ready to go to the palace right away. But Samuel told him to continue tending the sheep for his father, because David's brothers had to join the army. Saul, who was Israel's present king, needed help fighting the Philistines. David wished he could go with his brothers to prove himself. One morning, as David watched the sheep, a lion ran off with a lamb. David chased the lion. He aimed a stone at the lion with his sling and hit the beast in the head. The lion dropped the lamb and ran away. "I hope to be a brave soldier and a good king," David said. David's chance to prove himself came, but not as he expected. King Saul was worried about the war and needed some music to soothe him. The king heard that David was a good harp player, and David's father agreed to let his son play for the king in the evening. David played for the king every night until the king fell asleep. The king grew fond of David. When David's brothers had been at war for 40 days, their father sent David to the battlefront with food. When their father sent David to the battlefront with food, when David got there, the soldiers were shouting. David left the food with a guard and hurried to the soldiers. Goliath, the Philistines' leader, had stepped onto the battlefield. He was a giant. His armor alone looked as if it weighed more than David. The spear Goliath carried looked mighty enough to stab the sky. "Choose one man to fight against me," roared Goliath. If he kills me, the Philistines will be your slaves. If I kill him, you shall become our slaves." Most of the soldiers ran away, and David realized this was his chance to prove himself. He went to the king and said, "I will fight Goliath." "You cannot fight him," Saul said. "You are only a boy." David described his battle with the lion. "I will defeat Goliath, just as I did the lion," he said. "God will protect me." The king ordered his servant to bring a suit of armor, and David tried it on. It was so heavy, David could not even move. Saul gave David a large sword, but David could not lift it. David took off the armor, then he gathered 5 stones. He pulled out his sling, and he was ready to face Goliath. Goliath looked down at David and laughed. David said, "You come against me with a mighty spear, but I come against you in the name of God." As Goliath's shadow fell over him, David loaded the sling and whirled the stone. Goliath raised his spear. David took aim and let the stone fly. Do you think it hit him? As the stone hit his forehead, Goliath dropped his spear and crashed to the ground. David had beaten Goliath. Saul said to David, "From this day forward, you shall be the commander of my army." David bowed to Saul, accepting his new position. Then he took Goliath's armor and spear. David wanted them as a reminder of God's power. With God beside him, David did not have to be big to be brave. I hope you all enjoyed that story about David and Goliath.
Did you boys and girls learn anything from that story? It's amazing how God can help us when we feel like we can't help ourselves. You remember that David was just a boy. He came to the battlefield to bring his older brother's lunch, and when he got there, he saw that they were all scared of this Goliath. And David couldn't understand because he knew that God would protect him. Do you know God will protect you too? And like Miss Colleen said at the end of the story, you don't have to be big if you have God with you, because God can do so many more things than we can. I hope that you have a good week and that you've enjoyed this story. Don't forget to tell your mom and dad that you love them and pray for them every day. Read your Bible and come to Sunday school. Well, that's all we've got for today, boys and girls. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.